The ultrasound wand was gliding over the gel when the nurse's hand suddenly stopped. Her eyes locked on the screen, then darted to me, then back. Her professional smile vanished. "I need you to wait in the consultation room," she said, her voice low. "Don't go back to your wife yet. There's something you need to see alone first." My wife, Alina, was in the next room, excitedly texting her mom our baby's first blurry photo. We'd been trying for years. This moment was everything we dreamed of. But in that sterile consultation room, a cold truth was waiting. A truth hidden in my own DNA, discovered by a machine, and now held by a stranger in scrubs who looked more like a grim messenger than a caregiver. The nurse's name was Sarah. She closed the door, her expression a mask of professional conflict. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "what I'm about to show you falls into a gray area. A legal and ethical gray area that medical schools don't prepare you for. I was here for a routine viability scan, but the lab ran a standard non-invasive prenatal test on your wife's blood, checking for chromosomal issues. That test also analyzes fetal DNA, and that DNA is compared, in a way, to the parental samples provided." She took a deep breath. "Your blood sample from your preconception workup was still on file. The system flagged an anomaly, a significant one. The algorithm found 0 shared markers between your DNA and the fetal DNA in your wife's bloodstream." My mind went blank, a static hum. "That's impossible," I whispered. "There has to be a mistake. The test is wrong." "It's 99.9% accurate," she said softly. "It's not wrong. This happens more than people think. Estimates say between 1 and 10% of all pregnancies involve misattributed paternity." The number hung in the air, 1 in 10. I felt the room tilt. Alina, my Alina, we met in graduate school, both studying architecture. She was the brilliant, quiet force in the studio, all focused intensity and sharp pencils. I was the big picture guy, obsessed with how structures fit into landscapes. We balanced each other. For our 3rd anniversary, we hiked the Cascade Pass. At the summit, with the world spread below us, I asked her to build a life with me. She cried and said yes. We spent 5 years saving, planning, dreaming of this child. The nursery was already painted a soft gray. We picked out a name, Liam, after my grandfather. All of it, every shared dream, now sat in this room under the cold fluorescence, being dissected by a stranger with a laptop. Sarah turned the screen toward me. "This is the lab portal. This column is your genetic marker profile. This column is the fetal cell-free DNA profile extracted from your wife's blood. The system requires a 99.9% match probability to confirm paternity. Here, the probability is 0.01%. Statistically, it's impossible for you to be the biological father." The charts and numbers blurred. This was my life, reduced to a spreadsheet of mismatched code. "Why are you showing me this?" I finally managed. "Isn't this confidential? Don't you tell the mother first?" "That's the gray area," Sarah said, her voice dropping. "Officially, I am not supposed to have accessed this information for this purpose. The test was ordered for medical screening, not paternity. But the finding is there in the raw data, and my professional code says I protect patient confidentiality. But which patient? Your wife, the unborn child, or you, the presumed father sitting in front of me, whose entire life is about to change based on information you don't have?" She leaned forward. 2 years ago, I was in a similar situation. I followed protocol. I informed the mother of the incidental finding. She told her husband the baby wasn't his. He left. He also sued the practice for emotional distress, claiming we destroyed his marriage by disclosing information that wasn't medically necessary for the child's health. The lawsuit is still ongoing. I just sat there. "So what happens now?" "Now," Sarah said, "you have information you were never meant to have. And I have broken a dozen protocols to give it to you, because I believe not knowing is a different kind of harm, a sanctioned lie." She closed the laptop. "I can't give you a printout. I can't be your witness. This conversation never happened. But you now know the biological truth. What you do with it, that's your burden. The weight of it crushed my chest. Alina was 20 feet away, oblivious, holding a grainy black and white photo she thought was our future. I walked out of the room on numb legs. Alina looked up, her face radiant. Everything okay? They just needed to double-check some measurements, I heard myself say. My voice came from a distant tunnel. All good. We drove home in silence, but it was my silence. She chatted about baby registries. I nodded, smiling a hollow smile. The man in the rearview mirror was a stranger, an actor playing the role of a happy father-to-be. That night I lay awake, Sarah's words on a loop. 1 to 10%, 0.01% probability, your burden. I needed to understand. I needed proof I could hold. At 2 a.m., I went to my home office and began to research non-invasive prenatal paternity testing, NIPP, a simple blood draw from the mother after 8 weeks. It isolates fetal DNA. They compare it to a cheek swab from the alleged father. Accuracy, 99.9. I read medical journal articles about the incidental finding of misattributed paternity, the ethical chaos. Doctors and genetic counselors deeply divided. Some argued for absolute non-disclosure to preserve family unity. Others said withholding the truth from a presumed father was a profound betrayal of his autonomy. I was no longer a husband awaiting a son. I was a case study. The next morning, I called in sick. I waited until Alina left for her yoga class. Then I went to the one place I knew could give me an answer and a weapon, a private DNA testing lab downtown. The clinic was cold and efficient. I paid in cash, $499. I did the cheek swab myself in a sterile booth. They would test my sample against a database, but more importantly, they gave me a sealed, legally admissible collection kit to take home. A second kit for a paternity test. This is where the plan formed cold and clear. I needed a sample from Alina, something with the baby's DNA. That meant getting a sample of her blood, which was impossible, or the ultrasound photos were useless. But there was another way. The prenatal vitamin she took every morning. It was a capsule. I could replace its contents. For 3 days I watched. Her ritual was precise. 7 a.m. with a full glass of water at the kitchen island. I ordered empty gelatin capsules and a fine, harmless botanical powder filler online. On the 4th day, while she was in the shower, I did it. My hands shook. I emptied the potent prenatal blend from one capsule into the sink, washed it down. I filled the empty capsule with my inert powder and sealed it back in the bottle. I hid the stolen, vitamin-filled capsule in a sealed bag in my office. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. The vitamin contained her cells, not the baby's. I needed the fetal DNA, and I remembered something from my frantic research. The baby's cells circulate in the mother's bloodstream. A standard blood draw would have it. A wild, desperate idea took shape. Alina had her next obstetrician appointment in a week. They would take blood for the standard second trimester panel. What if I could intercept that sample, or get a copy of the results? It seemed insane, but then so was my entire life. I drove to the medical plaza a day before her appointment, a recon mission. I sat in the parking lot, watching the lab courier arrive at 3:15 p.m. sharp. A woman in blue scrubs walked out with a locked cooler, placed it in a van marked Biopath Diagnostics. An idea, fragile and dangerous, clicked. What if the sample never made it to the lab? What if it had a little accident? The day of Alina's appointment, I followed her. I watched her walk into the building. My phone buzzed, a text from her. All good, just waiting for the phlebotomist. Love you. The word love felt like a physical blow. I saw the courier van pull into the loading zone. This was it. I got out of my car, holding a cheap, leaking travel coffee cup. I timed my walk to intersect with the courier, a young man hustling with the cooler toward the van. I stumbled as if tripped by the curb. The coffee, mostly cold by design, splashed across the front of his scrubs and the cooler handle. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I blurted, fumbling with napkins. "Let me help." It was chaos. He set the cooler down on the ground to wipe his shirt. I was apologetic, clumsy, dabbing at the cooler with napkins, blocking his view. With one hand, I flicked the simple latch on the cooler. It wasn't locked, just secured. With the other, I pretended to steady myself, palming the small, pre-labeled blood vial I had brought, a vial filled with my own blood, drawn that morning and labeled with a forged version of Elena's patient sticker. The switch took less than 2 seconds. His sample tube for mine, I closed the latch. The courier, annoyed but not suspicious, brushed me off. "It's fine, sir, just please be careful." He loaded the cooler and drove away. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had just committed a felony, interstate transport of a fraudulent biological sample. But in that cooler was a tube of Elena's blood drawn for her prenatal care. And now it was in my coat pocket, warm against my chest. I had the source. The fetal DNA was in that vial, intertwined with hers. Now I just needed a lab that asked no questions. I found one online, a place with a discreet mailing address and a guarantee of confidential results. I packaged the stolen vial and my cheek swab kit with a fake client name. I dropped it in a mailbox across town. The waiting was torture. Elena was glowing, talking about feeling the first flutters of movement. She'd place my hand on her stomach, and I'd force a smile, feeling nothing but a chilling emptiness. I was mourning a son that never was, while she celebrated his existence. 7 days later, the email arrived. The subject line, "Your confidential results." I opened it in the garage alone. The document was stark. A table, alleged father, sample A mother, sample B child, fetal DNA from maternal blood. Conclusion, probability of paternity, 0%. Alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the fetus. There it was, the final, undeniable proof. The dream was officially dead. Paperwork had killed it. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, calm clarity. The man I was, the trusting husband, the eager father, that man was gone. Now there was only the facts and the fallout. I printed the results. I hid them. And I started to watch Elena with new eyes. Every phone call she took in another room, every late text, every girl's night out over the past year was now evidence. I needed to know who. I needed to understand the scale of the lie. I became a ghost in my own home. I installed a keylogger on our shared computer. I checked phone bills for repeated numbers. I became an expert in her schedule. And 2 weeks later, I found him. A number labeled David Client on the bill, with calls lasting hours, often after I was asleep. A search through her email trash folder, recovered with software, revealed flight confirmations for a project site visit to Denver last fall. A trip she said was with a female colleague. The hotel receipt, also in the trash, was for a king bed. One guest. David Miller, a name I knew, a former client from her old firm, a man she'd mentioned as brilliant but difficult. I found his picture on LinkedIn. Handsome, salt and pepper hair, a confident smile. The pieces snapped together with a sickening finality. I now had the what, the how, and the who. All I needed was the why, and for that I needed to hear it from her, but I couldn't ask. Not yet. Confrontation would give her time to spin a story, to lawyer up, to protect herself. I needed her to confess, unaware she was being recorded. I needed her to admit everything, thinking she was safe. I ordered a high-quality voice-activated recorder online. I planned to place it in her car, tucked under the passenger seat. Her commute to her new freelance office was 40 minutes each way. She often made private calls while driving. The device arrived. I charged it. The plan was set for the next morning. But that night, as I pretended to sleep, Elena's phone buzzed on her nightstand. A text preview lit up the dark room. It was from David. The message was just 3 words. "Is he suspicious?" I lay perfectly still, my back to her, the 3 words burning in the dark. Is he suspicious? a question that confirmed everything. The affair was active, the deception was ongoing, and now they were assessing their security, my security. I heard the soft tap of Alina's thumbs on her screen. A reply, I couldn't see it. A minute later, her breathing evened out into sleep. I stayed awake until dawn, a cold blueprint forming in my mind. Reaction was for victims. I needed to act. The next morning, I executed the plan. As Alina showered, I slipped the voice-activated recorder into her car, wedging it deep under the passenger seat, its magnetic case clinging to the seat frame. It would capture every word, every confession for the next 72 hours. Then I went to my office, the room that had once been our shared dream space for a home architecture firm. Now it was my command center. I accessed the keylogger data. The password to her email, which she'd typed in days ago, flashed on my screen. I was in. Her sent folder was a curated gallery of our happy life, but her drafts folder was a different story. A folder she'd never send, a digital diary of deception. Dozens of unsent emails addressed to David. Some were romantic, painfully so. Others were logistical. One, dated from the week of our viability scan, made my blood run cold. The scan went perfectly. He's completely in the dark, just gushing about names and nurseries. It's almost sad. The NIPT results should be back soon, but don't worry, my doctor only discusses the health markers. The paternity flag won't even show on my patient portal. This is going to work. We're so close. I can't wait for us to be a real family. All my love, E. She knew about the test's capability. She knew a flag could be raised, and she had actively relied on medical confidentiality to keep it hidden. This wasn't a passive lie. It was a constructed fraud. The recorder in her car delivered the next piece. That evening, I retrieved it. In the garage with the door closed, I plugged it into my laptop. The audio files populated. There were calls to her mother, chats with her sister, normal stuff. Then a call placed at 10:17 a.m., duration 22 minutes. David's voice was calm, smug. You're sure he hasn't seen anything? Alina's reply, the sound of traffic in the background. Positive. He's just stressed about work, about the baby. He's leaning into the dad role even harder. It's perfect. Good, because my end is almost set. Once the baby is born and paternity is established through my voluntary acknowledgement, we can start the process. The trust my father set up matures when I have a verifiable heir. This child is the key to everything. I paused the audio, a trust, an heir. This wasn't just an affair, this was a financial strategy. I rewound, listened again. The key to everything. David continued. Has he signed the updated beneficiary forms for his life insurance and the investment account? My stomach dropped. I had signed those forms 2 months ago. Alina said it was standard estate planning for the baby. I'd signed without a second thought. He signed them last month, Alina said. You're the secondary beneficiary on the life insurance right after me, and on the investment account. Perfect. And once we're together and paternity is clear, we petition to have him removed as the legal father. His rights terminated. My name on the birth certificate. The trust unlocks. And if anything happens to him before we separate, the assets flow to you and then to our child, to us. There was a long silence on the recording, filled only with the hum of her car's engine. David, Alina's voice was small. The life insurance thing, that's just a worst-case scenario backup, right? Of course, my love, just planning for every contingency. But first things first. We need him emotionally invested, financially supportive, and legally bound until the birth. Then we shift the narrative. We make him the unstable one, the jealous, distant husband. We document it. By the time we file for separation and introduce paternity, it will look like he's just lashing out. I sat back, the walls of the garage closing in. This was beyond betrayal. This was a long-term financial and legal conspiracy. I was a mark in a con, and the prize was my money, my name on a birth certificate I had no right to, and potentially my life. The shock hardened into a new, more dangerous resolve. They weren't just lying to me. They were building a legal and financial trap with me as the foundation. I needed to dismantle it, brick by brick, without them seeing a single tool. The first brick, the beneficiary forms. I couldn't simply revoke them without tipping my hand, but I could change them. The next day, I logged into my employee portal at work. The life insurance and retirement accounts were managed through a third-party administrator. There was an option to update beneficiaries online. The system required two-factor authentication sent to my phone. Easy. I changed the primary beneficiary on my life insurance from Alina Hayes to the Hayes Family Living Trust, a trust that did not exist yet. The contingent beneficiary I listed as the American Heart Association. I removed Alina entirely. For the investment account, I did the same. I made the changes, received the confirmations, and printed the audit trail. They would receive no notification. The next statement wouldn't generate for another quarter. Brick 2, the legal fatherhood. This was the most complex part. In our state, a husband is presumed to be the legal father of any child born during the marriage. That presumption could be rebutted, but it required a court action, often initiated by the mother, the biological father, or the husband. If I did nothing, I would be the legal father, liable for 18 years of child support for a child that wasn't mine. If I acted too soon, I alerted them. I needed a lawyer, not a family law attorney, but a litigator with a background in fraud and civil conspiracy. I found one, Marcus Thorne. His firm website featured cases against corporate whistleblowers and complex financial deception. I scheduled a consultation under the guise of a potential business dispute. Thorne's office was all dark wood and silence. He was in his 50s, with the calm demeanor of a man who had seen every lie. I didn't start with Alina. I started with David Miller. I placed the LinkedIn printout on his desk. I believe this man, along with my wife, is engaged in a long-term conspiracy to commit paternity fraud for financial gain, specifically to access a trust fund tied to his lineage. I have DNA proof I am not the biological father. I have audio of them discussing the scheme, including the manipulation of life insurance beneficiaries. I need to protect myself from being named the legal father, and I want to explore any civil or criminal action against them. Thorne steepled his fingers. The DNA proof, how did you obtain it? I told him about the private test, the kit. I did not mention Nurse Sarah. I did not mention the stolen blood vial. I said my wife had consented to a prenatal paternity test out of paranoia about genetic conditions, and I had kept the results. He nodded slowly. That's admissible. The audio, if obtained in a state with one-party consent laws, which we have, is also admissible. The beneficiary fraud is a serious angle, but you must understand your primary shield is the truth. We need to get ahead of their narrative. His plan was aggressive. First, we would use the DNA evidence to file a preemptive motion with the court to disestablish paternity. This was rare before a birth, but not impossible, especially with clear and convincing evidence of fraud. We would frame it as a protective measure for all parties, including the unborn child, to ensure correct biological and legal relationships from the start. Second, we would send a cease and desist letter to David Miller, outlining our awareness of the conspiracy to commit fraud and our intent to pursue civil damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy, and fraud. This would shock them, likely causing them to make mistakes. But Thorne warned, once we file, the war is official. There will be no more covert recording. They will lawyer up. Your marriage will be publicly, legally over. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the picture of David Miller on the desk. I thought of the audio of him calling my unborn child the key to everything. I was prepared. File it, I said. The paperwork took a week. In that week, I played my part perfectly. I attended a baby CPR class with Alina. I assembled a crib, my hands tightening screws with a focused rage I channeled into the task. I smiled. I rubbed her feet. I was the doting husband, a performance worthy of an award. Meanwhile, Thorne worked. The motion to disestablish paternity was a 20-page document attaching the DNA results, a timeline of the marriage, and a sworn affidavit from me detailing the discovery of the affair via the recorded conversation. It stopped short of alleging the full financial conspiracy, holding that card back. The court filing was electronic, invisible to them, but the cease and desist letter was a physical weapon. Thorne advised we have it delivered to David's office when Alina was with him. He had tracked her car via a temporary GPS tag I'd placed, a legal gray area Thorne said was investigative necessity, and knew they had a lunch date planned at a restaurant near his firm. The day of delivery, I was a nerve ending. I sat in a coffee shop across from David's sleek downtown office tower. At 12:30 p.m., I saw them exit the building together, Alina's hand briefly on his arm. They walked down the street, laughing. The sight was a physical ache I transformed into fuel. A process server, a woman in a business suit, entered the building's lobby at 12:45. At 1:15, my phone buzzed. It was Alina. Her name flashing on the screen felt like an alarm. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text, "Call me, urgent." I waited 10 minutes, then called back, my voice coated in false concern. "Hey, everything okay? You sounded stressed." Her voice was a tight wire. "Where are you?" "At the office. Why? What's wrong?" David just got served with some insane legal letter at work. It's from a lawyer named Marcus Thorne. It mentions you. It mentions paternity. What is this, Daniel? What have you done? The performance began. I let a beat of confused silence hang. What? Served? A lawyer? Alina, I have no idea what you're talking about. Thorne, is this some client dispute he has? Why would it mention me? It says you're alleging he's involved in some fraud with me. About the baby. This is crazy. Her panic was real, but it was the panic of a caught conspirator, not an innocent woman. Alina, calm down. I don't know anything about this. Maybe it's a scam, a horrible scam. Where are you? You shouldn't be upset. It's not good for the baby. I layered my voice with husbandly concern. Let me call my HR department, see if they've heard of this firm. Maybe it's some identity theft thing. I'll figure this out. Just go home, okay? I'll meet you there. I could hear David's voice in the background, angry, muffled. She was with him. Perfect. Just come home, Alina, I said softly. We'll fix this together. I hung up. I didn't move from the coffee shop. I watched the street. 20 minutes later, Alina's car screeched to a halt in front of David's building. She didn't get out. He came out, got in the passenger seat. The car sped off. They were in crisis mode, and crisis makes people reckless. The recorder in her car was now their confessional booth. I retrieved it that night. Alina came home alone, pale and shaken. She had a story ready. A former client of David's was making wild accusations, trying to extort him, and my name got mixed up in it. She delivered it over dinner, her eyes searching my face for disbelief. I sold bewilderment and supportive anger. That's terrifying. We should call the police. This is harassment. I played my part so well I almost believed it. Later in the garage, I listened to the day's recording. The post-lunch conversation in the car was gold. David's voice shaking with fury. He knows, he has to know. How else does his lawyer have your name, have details? He can't know, Alina crying. He's been completely normal. This has to be a coincidence, a mistake. A mistake that cites paternity fraud. No, he's playing you. He's known for weeks. The DNA test. Did you ever see the full report from your doctor? No, just the sheet that said low risk for everything. That's all they give. He could have accessed the full data or done his own test. God, Alina, if he has DNA proof, our entire plan, the trust, my father will disown me if this becomes a public scandal. We need to move first. We need to file for separation. Today, we paint him as abusive, controlling. We get a restraining order based on this harassment through the lawyer. I can't just file for separation. On what grounds? On grounds of his mental instability, his unfounded accusations. We say he's become violently jealous, paranoid about the baby's paternity. We use his own legal motion against him as proof of his delusion. There was a long pause, then Alina's voice small and resolved. Okay, what do we do? You go home, you act normal. Tomorrow you call a lawyer, my lawyer, Sandra Vance. You tell her everything. Well, not everything. You tell her your husband has become unhinged, is accusing you of an affair with a client, and is using legal threats to harass you. You fear for your safety and the baby's. You seek a temporary restraining order and exclusive use of the marital home. We hit him before he can hit us again. The recording ended. I sat in the dark, a cold smile touching my lips. They had taken the bait. They were moving from covert fraud to overt legal attack. They were giving me exactly what I needed, a documented, false claim of instability that I could demolish with facts. The battlefield was set. They were coming for me with lies. And I was ready for them with the truth. I didn't wait for their legal papers. I brought my own. The next morning, I met Marcus Thorne at the courthouse. We weren't there to defend. We were there to attack. While Alina was presumably in her lawyer's office spinning her tale of a paranoid husband, we filed a civil lawsuit. David Miller and Alina Hayes were named as co-defendants. The charges: civil conspiracy, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with marital relations. The suit sought damages for the cost of the prenatal care I'd paid for, the emotional trauma, and punitive damages aimed at the value of David's trust fund, a number his own words had helped us estimate. But the real weapon was the request for a temporary restraining order of our own. We asked the court to bar David from any contact with me, and to bar Alina from dissipating or altering any marital assets, including my life insurance benefits. We attached the audio transcript and the DNA report. The filing was a thunderclap. It hit the docket at 10 a.m. By 10:30, my phone was ringing with a number I didn't recognize. It was Sandra Vance, Alina's lawyer. Her voice was clipped, professional, and icy. Mr. Hayes, my client has just been made aware of this frivolous filing. We are considering our options, including a motion for sanctions. You are clearly escalating a family matter into a malicious public spectacle. My client is protecting himself from a demonstrable fraud, Thorne said, having taken the phone. We suggest you advise your client and her co-defendant to focus on their answer to the complaint. Good day. He hung up. The war was no longer covert. It was on the record. The first skirmish was the hearing for our temporary restraining order set for 3 days later. The night before, I retrieved the voice recorder from Alina's car one final time. The audio was a symphony of panic. They knew about the lawsuit. David was furious, scared. My father's lawyers are involved now. If this trust is jeopardized, I will be disinherited. This cannot happen, Alina. You need to fix this. How he has evidence. Then we discredit the evidence. We say he manipulated you into saying those things. We say he's tech-savvy, that he fabricated the audio. We say the DNA test is fraudulent, that he swapped samples. We fight fire with bigger fire. They were moving to the nuclear option, claiming I had engineered the entire crisis. It was a desperate, dangerous play. The hearing was in a small, wood-paneled courtroom. Alina arrived with Sandra Vance, a sharp-eyed woman in a severe black suit. David was there with his own attorney, a silver-haired man from a prestigious firm. I sat beside Thorne, feeling the weight of their collective stare. The judge, an older woman with a tired expression, called the case. Vance argued first. She painted a picture of a husband who had become unhinged upon his wife's pregnancy, who was now lashing out with fabricated evidence to punish her and an innocent business associate. She requested the court deny our restraining order and instead grant her client exclusive use of the marital home for her safety and the safety of her unborn child. Then it was Thorne's turn. He stood calmly. Your Honor, this is not a case of marital discord. It is a case of premeditated, financially motivated fraud. He introduced the DNA test results as Exhibit A. He then played a selected, devastating clip from the audio recording. David's voice filled the quiet courtroom. The trust my father set up matures when I have a verifiable heir. This child is the key to everything. The judge's eyebrows rose. Thorne followed with the clip about the life insurance. If anything happens to him before we separate, the assets flow to you and then to our child. The color drained from Alina's face. David's lawyer put a hand on his client's arm, a clear signal to stay silent. Your Honor, Thorne concluded, we are not asking the court to adjudicate paternity today. We are asking it to prevent the further dissipation of assets and to protect my client from the individuals who, by their own admission, see his death as a contingency. The judge didn't need long. She denied Vance's request for exclusive use of the home. Then she granted our temporary restraining order in full. David was ordered to have no contact with me, direct or indirect. Alina was barred from changing beneficiaries or moving marital funds. The judge also, on her own motion, ordered a forensic examination of the audio recording to be conducted by a court-appointed expert to address the defense's fabrication claim. It was a total victory, but as we walked out of the courtroom, Thorne pulled me aside. They're backed into a corner. Cornered animals are unpredictable. The forensic exam will prove the audio is real. They know that. They will try something else. He was right. 2 days later, the something else arrived. It was a notice from the state medical board. A complaint had been filed against me. The allegation: I had practiced medicine without a license by fraudulently obtaining and submitting a human biological sample for commercial testing, the stolen blood vial. Alina and David had somehow pieced it together. They must have contacted the lab, pressured them, traced the test. They were attacking the foundation of my evidence. If the medical board found merit, the DNA test could be ruled inadmissible in the civil and any future family court proceedings. It was a brilliant, vicious move. Thorne was concerned. This is a professional complaint. It's a different battlefield. It can take months to resolve, but the cloud it creates, a judge in our paternity case might delay everything until it's settled. I felt the ground crumbling again. Then I remembered my first secret ally, Nurse Sarah. I had no way to contact her directly, but I knew where she worked. I drove to the medical plaza after hours and waited in the parking lot. When she finally walked out, alone and looking exhausted, I approached her. She startled, then recognized me. You, she whispered, looking around nervously. You can't be here. I need 5 minutes. They're coming for me. They filed a complaint with the medical board about the DNA test. Her face tightened. She nodded toward a bench at the edge of the lot. Talk. I laid it out quickly. The lawsuit, the audio, their counterattack on the DNA evidence. If they discredit that test, they win. They keep the fraud alive. Sarah stared at her hands. The blood vial, how did you get it? I told her, the switch, the courier. Her expression was unreadable. That was incredibly stupid and illegal, she sighed. But the result, the paternity result, is still the biological truth. The method doesn't change the fact. Will you help me? I asked, the question hanging in the cold air. I can't testify. I would lose my license for sure, but she paused. The system that flagged the non-paternity in the first place. It's an algorithmic flag in the lab software triggered by the NIPT. That flag and the associated probability report is part of the permanent medical record, your wife's record. It was generated the moment her blood was analyzed, weeks before you ever stole a vial. A new hope sparked. Can we get it? No, but her obstetrician can. It's in the electronic health record as an incidental finding. If her doctor accessed the full lab report, she saw it. She is ethically obligated to document that she saw it and what, if any, action she took. That doctor's note, that is discoverable in your lawsuit. You subpoena your wife's complete prenatal records. The truth is already in there, written by a medical professional, long before you ever got involved. It was a way out. The official medical record, created during routine care, would corroborate the DNA test. It would prove the truth existed independently of my actions. I thanked her. She stood to leave. "I'm doing this for the man who didn't know," she said quietly. "Not for the man who stole blood. Remember the difference." I subpoenaed the records that week. The response from the obstetrician's office was a thick envelope. Thorne and I pored over the pages, and there it was. The full NIPT lab report dated weeks prior. At the bottom, in a section titled Additional Findings, a single line, "Genetic analysis suggests non-paternity. Probability of reported paternal sample match, 0.01%. Next to it, a scanned note from the obstetrician, Dr. Evans. "Patient informed of normal screening results for trisomies. Discussed incidental finding of non-paternity per lab note. Patient acknowledged understanding and declined further discussion. Advised patient of potential psychosocial implications. Patient stated she would address with partner. Follow-up as scheduled." Elena had been told by her doctor, and she had declined further discussion. She had known from the very beginning. The note was a time-stamped nail in the coffin of her credibility. We filed the medical record with the court as a supplemental exhibit. The effect was immediate. Sandra Vance requested an emergency conference with the judge. In that private meeting, she reportedly argued that the medical record was protected by patient-doctor confidentiality. The judge disagreed, stating that by placing her emotional condition and the paternity of the child at issue in her pleadings, Elena had waived that confidentiality for the relevant records. The ground was shifting under them again. Then, we got the report from the court-appointed audio forensic expert. The recording was authentic. No edits, no manipulations. The voices were identified as Elena Hayes and David Miller with 98% certainty. We were winning, but the cost was a hollow house, a silent nursery, and a soul scraped raw. I was living in my own home like a ghost, passing Elena in the hallway with nothing but cold silence. The veneer of a shared life was gone, replaced by a brutal legal ceasefire. Then the final escalation came from an unexpected direction. A plain envelope arrived at Thorne's office, hand-delivered. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of an email. It was from David Miller's father, Arthur Miller, sent to David. The subject line, "Final warning." The body read, "David, your latest scheme has reached my ears via the family's legal counsel. Impregnating a married woman and conspiring to defraud her husband to trigger the heir clause is beyond foolish. It is criminal. The trust is irrevocably locked. You will not see a cent. Furthermore, if you do not withdraw from this sordid situation and settle these lawsuits immediately, I will instruct counsel to cooperate fully with the husband's attorneys and provide any financial records they request. You have made your bed. Do not drag the family name further through the mud." It was a surrender, a white flag from the very power they were trying to access. David's father had cut him off. The financial motive for the entire conspiracy had just evaporated. Thorne smiled as he showed it to me. "This is the break. The father is terrified of scandal. He'll throw David to the wolves to save the family reputation. We can use this." He drafted a letter to David's attorney, attaching a copy of the email. The message was simple: withdraw your opposition to the disestablishment of paternity. Have your client submit to a court-ordered paternity test after the birth to confirm he is the biological father. Settle the civil lawsuit for a substantial sum, acknowledging the fraud. Do this, and we keep Arthur Miller's email out of the public court file. Fight us, and we will subpoena Arthur Miller and every financial record of the trust. It was checkmate. David's lawyer called within hours. A meeting was proposed, a settlement. The meeting took place in Thorne's conference room. David did not attend. Only his silver-haired lawyer, who looked weary. Sandra Vance was there for Elena. I sat beside Thorne, an observer to the end of my own nightmare. The terms were laid out. David would consent to being named the biological father after a post-birth test. He would not contest the disestablishment of my paternity. He would pay a settlement of $750,000 to me in exchange for dropping the civil claims against him. The life insurance beneficiary issue would be moot, as I had already changed them. For Alina, the terms were harsher. She would agree to an immediate divorce on grounds of her adultery and fraud. She would waive any claim to spousal support. The house, solely in my name from before the marriage, would remain mine. She would be entitled to half of the actual marital assets accrued during the marriage, which were minimal, as most of our savings had gone into the baby preparations she had orchestrated. She would have no claim to my retirement or future earnings. She would also be responsible for all her own legal fees and half of the medical costs for the pregnancy and birth, since the child was not mine. Vance argued, but weakly. The evidence was an avalanche. Alina, sitting beside her, was a shell, starring at the table. She had lost David's financial backing, her home, her marriage, and her narrative. All she had left was a baby and a biological father who was now financially crippled and furious with her. She signed. I signed. It was over. The legal war was won. As we stood to leave, Alina finally looked at me. There were no tears, just a hollowed-out emptiness. "I loved you once," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at the woman I had built dreams with, the woman who had turned our life into a calculated con. "No," I said, my voice calm, final. "You loved what I could give you. There's a difference." I walked out of the room, the signed agreement in my hand. The battle was done. But the war for my life, for my future, was just beginning. I had the legal victory. I had the money. I had the house. Now I had to figure out who I was and how to live in a world where the deepest trust had been weaponized against me. The silence waiting for me at home was no longer filled with tension, but with a vast, echoing question. What now? The silence in the house after the settlement was a physical thing. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of before. It was the hollow echo of a life dismantled. I had won. I had the deed, the money, the legal absolution. But victory, I discovered, is just a different kind of emptiness. The first practical task was the divorce. With the settlement agreement signed, it was a swift, procedural unraveling. The final hearing was a 5-minute video conference. A judge's voice declared the marriage dissolved on grounds of adultery and fraud. With a click, it was over. 7 years erased by a digital signature. Alina moved out the following weekend. She came with her sister and a rental truck. I stayed upstairs, listening to the sounds of her life being carted away. The crib we'd assembled, the glider, the tiny clothes, all of it went. She took only what was hers or bought for the baby. She didn't ask for anything else. There was nothing left to say. When the front door closed for the last time, I walked through the rooms. They were half empty, marked by dust outlines where furniture had been. The nursery was just a room again, a blank box with gray walls. I closed the door. David Miller's settlement payment hit my account, $750,000, a number that felt both enormous and meaningless. It was blood money, compensation for a stolen future. I moved it into a separate account, unsure what to do with it. It felt tainted. My friends and family knew only fragments. I told my parents the marriage had broken down due to infidelity. I didn't give them the horrific details. The pity in their eyes was bad enough. I became distant, withdrawing from social circles we'd shared. I was the cautionary tale, the guy whose wife had an affair while pregnant. The whispers followed me. I threw myself into work. The architecture firm I'd been building as a side project became my entire world. I designed structures with clean lines and solid foundations, things that could be trusted to hold. My client list grew. The professional success was a stark contrast to the personal wreckage. But at night the questions returned, not about Alina or David, about the child. A boy I learned through a terse email from Alina's lawyer updating her contact information. He was born in late summer. His name was Leo. She had listed David Miller as the father on the birth certificate. My legal disestablishment of paternity was finalized before the birth, so my name was nowhere on it. I was a legal stranger. I found myself staring at that name in the email. Leo. A child I had spoken to, dreamed of, planned for. A child who had, for months, been the center of my universe. And now he was someone else's son, living a life I would never see. The loss was profound and confusing. I wasn't mourning a child that died. I was mourning a child that never was, while a real living boy carried the genetic code of my betrayal. This was the unresolved wound. The legal system could sever financial ties and marital bonds, but it couldn't sever the psychological ones. I started reading about misattributed paternity, the studies I'd avoided during the fight. The numbers, 1 to 10%. The long-term studies showed that many men who discover non-paternity suffer from severe, complex grief, depression, and a form of identity crisis. They call it a biosocial paradox, the social role of fatherhood ripped away by biological truth. I was a walking statistic, and the money in the bank didn't fix it. 6 months after the divorce, I received a summons for a different case. The medical board had completed its investigation into the complaint about the stolen blood vial. I had to appear. The hearing room was small, formal. Alina had filed the complaint, but she did not attend. The board's attorney presented the facts. I had confessed to the switch in my affidavit for the civil case. The lab confirmed the submitted sample did not match the mother's identity. It was an open and shut case of misconduct. My defense, prepared by a different lawyer, was one of mitigation. We didn't deny it. We presented the context, the fraud, the conspiracy, the life insurance discussion. We argued that while the method was unlawful, the pursuit of the truth was necessitated by a criminal scheme against me. The board deliberated for an hour. Their ruling was a mixed bag. They found I had indeed practiced medicine without a license and submitted a fraudulent sample. I was issued a formal reprimand and a fine of $15,000. However, they noted the extraordinary extenuating circumstances and declined to refer the case for criminal prosecution. The DNA test result itself was noted as factually accurate despite the illicit means of procurement. It was a slap on the wrist, a pricey one. I wrote the check, another cost of the war. Walking out of that building, I felt a chapter truly close. All the battles, legal, medical, personal, were over. I was standing in the aftermath, and it was time to decide what to build there. The settlement money felt wrong just sitting there. One afternoon, I was reading an article about the very ethical dilemma that started it all, whether medical professionals should disclose incidental non-paternity findings. The article quoted bioethicists and featured stories of men who discovered the truth decades later, their lives upended. An idea, fragile at first, began to form. I reached out to Marcus Thorne, not for legal help, but for advice. I told him I wanted to use the settlement money to fund something. A non-profit legal aid organization focused specifically on paternity fraud cases, to help men navigate the impossible legal and emotional maze I'd just survived. Thorne was skeptical but intrigued. It's a niche area and emotionally charged. You'd be painting a target on your back. The target's already there, I said. Might as well use it as a shield for someone else. We drafted a plan, the Hayes Foundation for Paternity Integrity. It would provide grants for DNA testing, connect individuals with lawyers experienced in disestablishment cases, and fund research into the psychosocial impacts. It would also advocate for clearer laws and ethical guidelines in hospitals regarding incidental findings. I used a portion of David's money to seed it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The trust fund he sought to unlock was now funding an organization to prevent what he did. The work gave me a purpose, a painful personal purpose. I didn't speak publicly about my story, but I guided the foundation's direction. We got our first clients. A man in his 50s who discovered through a home DNA test that his youngest child wasn't his. A young guy whose girlfriend's prenatal screening revealed a mismatch. Their confusion, their rage, their grief, I recognized all of it. We couldn't fix their pain, but we could give them a roadmap through the legal nightmare. A year passed. The house no longer felt like a crime scene. I renovated. I knocked down the wall between the kitchen and the living room, opening up the space. I turned the nursery into a proper home office with a view of the backyard. I was rebuilding, literally. Then the final surprise arrived. It was an email, not from a lawyer, but from a medical journal. The subject line: request for interview, patient perspectives on incidental findings. The researcher was a bioethicist from a university hospital. She was writing a paper on the clinical and ethical handling of misattributed paternity discovered through prenatal genetic screening. She had, through anonymous sources in the medical legal community, heard about a case that involved a prenatal NIPT flag, a whistleblowing nurse, and a subsequent legal battle. She wanted to interview the presumed father for a qualitative study, with full anonymity guaranteed. My first instinct was to delete it, to keep my story buried. But I thought of Nurse Sarah risking her license in that gray area. I thought of the thousands of men every year who were in the dark. The ethical debate was happening in academic journals and hospital committees, but the human voices, the voices of the men affected, were often absent, shrouded in shame. I agreed to the interview under a pseudonym. We spoke for 2 hours over a secure video line. I told her everything, from the ultrasound room to the final settlement. I talked about the loneliness of the discovery, the system's confusion, the hollow victory. At the end, she asked, knowing what you know now, and given the profound harm you experienced, do you believe the incidental finding of non-paternity should ever be disclosed to the presumed father by a healthcare provider? I was quiet for a long time. I thought of the devastation. I thought of the lies that would have continued, of the financial trap I'd have been in, of the life built on a foundation of sand. I thought of Leo and the truth of his origin. Yes, I said, my voice firm. With the right support, with ethical guidelines that protect everyone, the truth has to matter. The alternative is sanctioning a lie that steals a person's autonomy, their informed consent to their own life. The harm of knowing is brutal. But the harm of not knowing, that's a life sentence lived in someone else's fiction. The study was published 8 months later. My quotes were there, attributed to Subject Delta. The paper argued for a new, patient-centered protocol that balanced confidentiality with compassion, suggesting that genetic counselors be involved whenever such a flag appears, to support all parties. It cited the Hayes Foundation as an example of post-discovery support. Reading my own words in a medical journal was surreal. My pain had been distilled into data, my experience a case study for change. It felt like a strange, quiet redemption. The last loose end was the most personal. I never contacted Alina. I never tried to see Leo. That chapter was closed for their sake and mine, but I did one thing. I set up a small, irrevocable educational trust in Leo's name, funded by a portion of the settlement. It would mature when he turned 18. He would never know it came from me. The paperwork listed an anonymous donor. It was the final piece of closure, not for him, but for me. A severance package for the ghost of the father I almost was. Now my life is different, quieter. The foundation work is challenging but meaningful. I date occasionally, but trust comes slowly in fragments. The house is just a house, not a symbol of anything anymore. Sometimes in the deep quiet of the evening, I think about that moment in the ultrasound clinic, the nurse's hand stopping, the world splitting in two. She saw an impossible thing on a screen and she chose to speak. That single act of moral courage in a gray area set off a chain reaction that destroyed one life and forced me to build a new one. It was a horror story, a thriller, a tragedy. But in the end, it was just the truth. And as brutal as it was, I'd rather live here in the aftermath of the truth than spend one more day living a lie. The story ends not with a victory toast, but with a man in a quiet house at peace with the silence, knowing he owns every brick, every memory, and every hard-won truth within it. The battle is over. The war is done. And now we look at what it all means. So what do we take from a story like this? It's more than a tale of betrayal and revenge. It's a stark map of a modern ethical frontier, one that advances in technology are pushing us toward faster than our laws or morals can keep up. We now have machines that can whisper family secrets from a drop of blood. We have medical protocols built for one kind of truth, the health of a child, that stumble blindly into another kind of truth, the identity of a parent. And caught in the middle are real people, whose lives can be shattered by a line of data on a lab report. The central, agonizing question remains unanswered by any court or medical board. Does the right to know outweigh the right to privacy? Does the presumed father have a claim to a truth that fundamentally concerns him, even if it was discovered incidentally? There is no consensus, and because there isn't, the burden falls onto individual nurses, doctors, and partners in the dark, forcing them to make Solomonic decisions with no guidance. This story ended with a form of justice, a legal victory, a financial settlement, a foundation built from the ashes. But for every case like this one, there are countless others that end in silent suffering, in lifelong deception, or in violent upheaval. The 1 to 10% statistic isn't just a number. It represents millions of families navigating a lie, whether they know it or not. Perhaps the real horror isn't the discovery of the impossible, but the realization of how fragile our stories are. How the narrative of our lives, who we are, who we love, who we belong to, can be rewritten by a science we don't fully understand, governed by ethics we haven't yet defined. We are all, in a way, living in the gap between what technology can reveal and what humanity is prepared to handle. The next time you hear about a prenatal test, a home DNA kit, a genetic screening, remember that embedded in that code isn't just medical information. It's identity, it's lineage, it's the very story of us. And as we step into this new world, we must ask ourselves what we value more: the comfort of the story we've been told, or the integrity of the truth, no matter how devastating it may be. If you found this journey through the shadows of trust, technology, and truth compelling, make sure you're subscribed. We delve into the real-life stories that live at the edge of our modern dilemmas. Because sometimes, the most terrifying stories aren't found in fiction. They're hidden in the fine print of a lab report, waiting to be read. Thanks for watching.